Do either of you have any advice on how to make debates with large groups of people more engaging and productive?
Yeah, I can jump in and start us off. I think again, it depends how large is, but often, as Aniko was saying about the focus groups, it's worth having some kind of activity or something that just gets people on their feet sometimes. We often talk about getting people's voices in the room, so depending on how large the group is, sometimes just one activity where people go around and check in, so saying one word to describe how they're feeling, or if they were an animal today, what would they be, can kind of get people switching in. And in terms of kind of using, if you've got enough space for a large group, often when we do debates, in workshops, we'll sort of lay out a line on the floor, and we'll say sort of it's a spectrum from completely agreed to completely disagree, and we'll ask people to position themselves on that line, on that spectrum, as a way of just moving people around and getting them to embody the discussion that we're having, and then drawing on people from different points of the line, allowing people to move around depending on how much they're influenced by people's arguments. So there are ways but I think anything that you can do that gets people on their feet and getting their voice into the room can make a big difference.
So Sorry, I realised I was muted. I was going to say, did you have anything to add, Aniko?
No, I think I'd agree with that. Like having something interactive that breaks the ice, I'd say it's probably the most important. We quite often use like something as simple as like post-it notes even. Again, not really possible with a very, very large group. But if it's a manageable size, sometimes it helps to ask people to write down their thoughts and ideas and just post it on the wall. And then someone goes around and like reads them all out and kind of call on people to voice a little bit more detail behind them. It could really help encourage a conversation, especially if you have a more quiet group, I'd say.
Just to jump on there with the post-it notes, actually one thing that we did once was we had a post-it note snowball fight where everyone had to write one question, or you could have it write their thoughts on a post-it note, screw it up, and then we had a few minutes of everyone sort of having a snowball fight with the bunched up post-it notes. Health and safety, I don't know, you have to make sure no one throws it at anyone's eye, and then we went round and people picked up the one closest to them, opened it up and read it out. So again, just ways to kind of bring a bit of fun, and yeah, but post-it notes are a great way if you don't have time for everyone to speak, that everyone still feels that they're engaged. I like that, Aniko.
So I've got a question for Aniko and Holly too, if applicable. How do you go about recruiting focus group participants? And then further down as a follow-up to that as well, is do you often do more in-person or virtual focus groups?
Yeah, so with recruitment, I'd say it really depends on how close these respondents are to you and your objectives again. Often we do focus groups in different countries or in more remote areas where we kind of work with partners who help with recruitment. I think in that case, it's really important to be very clear about who are the people that you'd like to talk to, kind of having a very clear idea about the specific demographics, and then going through that. Quite often we use a very small quant survey to recruit, to make sure that we have various different opinions represented in the room as well. So again, it really depends on your objectives, and I'd say, like, kind of reaching back to Holly's advice about finding that common ground and what your objectives are, and kind of being really clear about, we have this research, or we want you to engage because at the end we're working towards this shared goal that really resonates people, really then helps to get people engaged. Because I feel like sometimes the hardest part for recruitment is getting people to actually show up or respond to you, and kind of having that initial very engaging invitation that's really clear about your objectives and what you're trying to achieve, and their role in that is really important.
Just to add briefly to that as well, I think you've got much more experience than I do, but we just launched our report Friday, and as part of that we held focus groups with teachers. And one thing that also really helped was being able to offer book vouchers as a thank you for those that could attend. So thinking if you have either budget or a way to thank attendees in some way, and making that clear is a good way of getting people to turn up. And also I was saying before the meeting started, actually it's also about recruiting a lot more people than you actually expect to turn up. So there will be a dropout rate, and that is something to just kind of factor in as well, and make sure that you reach out to many more than you actually need to speak to. And ours were all virtual. I don't know for the second part of the question, yeah, but we haven't done in person.
Yeah, so we do a mix of in-person or virtual, but I'd say since COVID, it's definitely been more virtual. It is a lot easier, I think, on the participant and on you as well to do them virtually, because it's just a lot less organization when it comes to finding a space, for example, or making sure that everyone get to that space. Online, you sort of kind of have that expectation that people will just show up. They'll be there for that hour and a half, 2 hours, and then they can log off. They don't need to travel. So when it comes to those, response rates that Holly just mentioned, so far we've found that virtual tends to do a little bit better. So if you recruit 8 people, you probably will have 6 in person. Maybe 8 out of 4 is a good number, I'd say. So I think online, but then in person has its own advantages, doesn't it? So like when you have those kind of group activities that we just talked about, obviously it's much nicer to do it in person. You can pick up those like non-verbal cues much better. And it's much easier, I think, to kind of engage people in person, in the sense that if someone's just genuinely really shy and quiet, online it's a little bit more difficult to convince them to put their camera on, for example. So there's benefits to both, I'd say.
Okay, so there's another question. Can you give an example or two of making the most of key findings, e.g. using them to talk with those making decisions? Either of you wanted to pick up on that?
Again, I can give examples from our Rebooting Education report 2023 that we've just launched. So one of the tricky things I found when I'd sort of written the survey, held the focus groups, done all the analysis, and then it was like, okay, what do we do with these findings? So firstly, we presented them in a really pretty report, and made sure that they were really engaging for anyone to kind of pick up and look at. And as Aniko was saying, a lot of that's to do with how you present the data and the mixture of quantitative and qualitative. In terms of using them to talk with those making decisions, for me, I often find it really helpful to have that mixture of quant and qual that Aniko was talking about. So having a few key statistics up my sleeve. So from the data from the report that we just launched, for example, we have 3 times as many teachers than are necessary are willing to become sustainability leads in their schools. So that to me is a really exciting stat that I can pull out and say, look, there's a lot of demand from teachers, a lot of interest in doing more in sustainability. But then also having some qualitative stories to back it up, and saying actually one of the teachers that we spoke to in our focus group was really worked closely with autistic children, and we were talking about how sort of the crossover between sustainability and special educational needs, and being able to pull out stories. So I think, I don't know if that fully answers the question, but for me it's about being able to pull out a few key stats, like quantitative stats, and then backing it up with really engaging stories and quotes, just to really paint that picture more thoroughly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As I mentioned, we have our big IKEA report launching in a couple of weeks' time, and I think that's a really good example for that, because it is a 100+ page long report, and we had the big job of condensing it into 4 pages for the key findings. And I think that's really important, because as the question's asked, to kind of use them to talk with those making decisions, they need to be short and they need to be to the point, because they're not going to read the 104 pages, no matter how interesting it is. So I think making that 4 pages or 1 page or however many you have as engaging and clear as possible, and having that clear story down as well. And I think that was the most difficult part for us with the IKEA research. It covers so many different topics. It's quite a difficult job to find a clear narrative that links it all together. And I think that's where also it comes in what I talked about, is that depending on who you're talking to and who you're targeting, different data points will be the key data points, and kind of being able to tailor that is also very important. But again, like you don't see it, and that's what's so difficult about it, that you don't always show all of your data. Kind of finding those priorities is the biggest challenge of it all. So again, yeah, I'm not sure how much that answers it, but I think thinking about who is the decision maker that you're talking to and what data matters to them the most is the most important thing. And then creating a very clear narrative around it. And also, again, linking to your objective and what you're trying to achieve out of that conversation is very important.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know I was looking at McCullough then, because we did our own report recently, and we had so many I read so many students' feedback, and I was just the same. It was really hard to pick and condense down because there's so many brilliant ideas and thoughts. Does anyone else have any further questions? Feel free to ask away, or put your hand up if you had another question.
Cecily, I'm just putting into the chat the questions from feedback, so if people want to respond on the chat or in the Jamboard.
Yes.
So I'm just typing them into there. If you want to just say what's going on.
If you've asked all your questions, that's brilliant. We have one final slide on the Jamboard, if you're on that, which is just, if you don't mind saying, if this session, you can do it now, or after we've finished, we'll leave the Jamboard up for a bit. But just saying, what has this session made you think about? What do you want to use in your own campaigns? And if you have any other feedback. And I think we'll be finishing in a minute.
It'd be great if we just round up. So it'd be great if people want to put anything into chat there. I know that's made me think a lot. Just in summary, thank you so much to both of you. Such a lot of expertise in the room, and also saying you're sharing how to do things, but also the spirit in which you do things is as important as that. So I was really, really appreciative of the way you've shared what you know and what you've experienced and your own learning. So thank you so much from InterClimate Network. I think we will have this summary recording that we can share. Cecily, do you want to say anything finally as well?
Just really to say the same is thank you so much. I myself have learned and made me think a lot of things as well. So I hope others joining in. And again, we'll be popping it on our website, might be in a week or two, and sharing it. So if you want to share in your school or with other students, please do make use of those recordings. And I think some really positive feedback coming in as well from attendees saying,
and
so what's incredibly helpful, very thought-provoking, and it's making them think about approaches in school, such as changing school menus, which is always tricky and sensitive. So yeah, thank you very much.